Paul Harvey used to introduce certain segments of his commentary with this simple phrase: not what, just why. I can't explain it, but I'm going to talk about it. Okay, content warning. This is super weird. And given that this might not be your first foray into this particular podcast, if we call it weird, then the needle has gone into the red. I was driving to one of those random places that I go and speak, and this was in the days before the tactical Toyota. I was driving a little 1992 four-wheel drive Isuzu Amigo. It's the first thing I bought after having my master's degree. And so I was driving this little car. It had a cloth top, and it didn't have any air conditioning. It had 260 air conditioning. You roll down both windows and you drive 60. And I was headed north to speak, and this gentleman was walking. It was unbearably hot, and he was dressed in a black suit. Now, to my young eyes, he looked to be really, really old. The suit he was wearing was austere and black. And I pulled over and asked if I could give him a ride. And he accepted. He got in and we drove. And we chatted, not really about anything consequential. We just kind of talked about who we were and where we were going. And really, it was more about who I was and where I was going. I'm not even sure I got the gentleman's name. But we drove along a little while, and we got into a small Tennessee town. And he said, "Hey, this is where I get out." And I eased the car over, and it got to the curb, and he stepped out and took one step away from the car, and then he turned abruptly. He stopped and placed his hands inside the passenger window and said, "And just because they're green, don't mean you should go through them." And with that, he turned around and walked away. Within a mile, maybe within 5 miles, I was tooling along in my little Amigo, and I came to this intersection in this little small town. One side was obscured by a hill. The other two directions that you could enter the intersection from, you could clearly see. And as I was approaching the intersection, the traffic light in the middle of it turned green. Red means stop. Green means go. Yellow, watch out. You better go slow. Keep your eye up on the light. It will tell you what is right. Red means stop. Green means go. But for some reason, that little jingle was not in my mind. But the out of context, weird words from a dude in a black suit. Just because they're green doesn't mean you should go through them. And so I engaged the clutch and tapped the brakes. And it was like a log truck had jumped out of hyperspace. From the eastern direction, from my right side, it came out of the blind spot behind the building, and it blew through the intersection and roared away. There is no way to accurately estimate the speed at which it was traveling. But had it occupied the intersection at the same time of a 1992 Isuzu Amigo with a cloth top, it would have decimated both vehicle and driver. It would have taken the little guy driving it and smeared them all across the rolling hills in Tennessee. I sat stunned. And I won't attempt any type of explanation. I won't try to tell you what it was or what I think it was. It's simply that it is a thing that happened. Or rather, it was a thing that did not happen. Because I was not killed that day. That's the thing that did not happen. Red means stop. Green means go. The law said I could enter the intersection. The light said I could enter the intersection. I had the right of way. But I've discovered that just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean it's always the right thing to do. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, and just because you have the power to do something doesn't mean you have permission to do something. Meekness is described by Jordan Peterson when he discusses the phrase, blessed are the meek. It's really blessed are those who carry swords, know how to use them, but choose not to. And having the right to do something, but deciding whether it's right to do or not, maybe it's the distinction between power and influence. First of all, the actual ability or power to make someone behave in a certain way, that's probably a false concept. Because you see, in order for you to have the power to make me behave a certain way, really is actually a concession on my part. If I exercise power over you and I can say, I make you do this or make you not do this, it really boils down to concession on your part. You really can't make another person do anything if they decide not doing is worth any price you exact on them. You really can't make a person not do something if they decide that doing something is worth more to them than the price you'll exact from them. Now, you may have the power to punish. You may have the ability to say, I'm going to invoke these consequences on the thing that is done or undone. But even though you have the ability to punish me, incarcerate me, execute me, torture me, whatever, that thing you didn't want me to do, I did. And the thing you told me not to do, I didn't do. You see, the other person still has the power to choose which path they follow. I can choose. I have the power to choose compliance or consequence. And no amount of cajoling, no amount of reward, and no amount of punishment can make me, in the literal sense of overt power. You can't make anybody do anything. I get uncomfortable when I see the ridiculous power antics of people who make children eat certain foods. And then every meal becomes a confrontation. Eat 2 chicken nuggets. Eat all your broccoli. These same adults would not be forced into eating things they did not like. They would not be forced into eating things they did not want. They would not be forced into eating things that they found disgusting. And I'm not trying to tell you how to parent your kids, but when kids are hungry, they'll eat. And I know lots of situations where people have been, quote unquote, forced to do something. And if I wanted to make you eat something, okay, if I wanted to make you eat something, I could put you to sleep and put it in your mouth. But that doesn't equal the same thing as you eating it. I know lots of grown adults. I know lots of people who've reached their maturity and they purposefully don't eat certain foods and they don't do certain activities. They don't cut grass. They don't arrive on time. They don't become in athletics and they don't attend worship services because in their minds they felt as they were made to do things as children. Maybe you've heard the concept of winning a battle but losing a war. You see, that power, even parental power, only lasts as long as I'm willing to be controlled by another person. Influence carries on a long, long time after direct power or direct control fails or fades. Now, is there ever a time to assert my rights? Is there ever a time to wield power, real or perceived? Is there ever a time to draw the sword from the sheath of restraint? Yes, certainly, I believe so. But those times when I decide that confrontation is the issue, and I've got a new quote now, violence is not the answer, but it's in the equation. Well, there are times when that's true, but those times are typically the exception and not the rule. So when I start asking, okay, I'm going to make this decision, I'm going to exert power, and I have the right to do this, the first question I've got to ask is this about needs or rights? Now, needs always trump rights. Legitimate needs, psychological, emotional, spiritual, physical needs, always take precedence over my perceived rights or my actual rights every single time. And forcing, quote unquote, forcing you to obey a rule, sustain a practice, may also be based on the same set of needs. I make you do what's best for you. I make you do what meets your physical needs or your emotional needs or your spiritual needs. So if there's a need dynamic, then the need always trumps the right. If you say something to somebody, or if you enforce a rule, if you do something and it's the legitimate, this is for your own good, rather than this makes me feel good. If it's for your own good, then that's probably a place that you can exercise power and you can depend on your rights as a compass guide. You see, on a ropes course, on a climbing trip, or on a gun range, I'm going to enforce certain things because it's my way or the highway. Now, you may choose not to participate, you may choose not to climb, you may choose not to shoot, but I'm not going to compromise your needs for psychological, emotional, and physical safety. Now, when we talk about needs, we're talking about actual needs, the actual need for the improvement or the safety of another person. I'm not going to accommodate a delusion. I won't help you propagate self-deception on your part. I won't help you propagate dissonance where you have this idea about who you are and it really doesn't match. And I'm not going to be made responsible for things that I don't actually control. I'm going to do my best to prevent harm, you harming the innocent, you harming me, or you harming yourself. And then I won't tolerate the abuse or manipulation under the guise of spirituality. In all those situations, I have the right to exercise power. In all those cases, I think it's a matter of, hey, my rights, and exercising my rights is right to do. 3 different occasions, the Apostle Paul would assert his rights as a Roman citizen. Now, listen to me carefully when we talk about things that are spiritual. Scripture is more often designed to modify my behavior rather than be wielded like a sword to control other people. And when Scripture self-describes, when Scripture is talked about as a sword, it is almost exclusively in the direct opposition to the spiritual forces of evil, or in the dissection between the thoughts and intents of the heart of the individual confronting Scripture, not being used against other people. It's being used just for us. Now, there's some exceptions: reprove, rebuke, and exhort. There are some exceptions, but in general, when I see someone using Scripture to manipulate or control other people's behavior, that falls under what I call spiritual abuse. That caveat aside, I may choose to forego my rights when the circumstances involve a vulnerability. Now, this is different than a need. A vulnerability is not necessarily a need, but I recognize that there's this enduring vulnerability, there's this weakness. It's basically a courteous accommodation. And a courteous accommodation is me recognizing a vulnerability. That your spouse has enduring vulnerabilities, your children have enduring vulnerabilities, and realizing, hey, this is a comfort or a discomfort zone, and accommodating a true vulnerability. That's not being asked to accommodate the stalking horse or the misuse or the abuse of the modern version of equity and inclusion. And we're distinguishing between a true vulnerability rather than a poor coping skill, or someone using a diagnosis of disadvantage, a disability, or discontentedness, or pseudo anxiety as a response, so that they can have an abdication of responsibility, accountability, freedom from consequences, and a get out of jail free card. Okay. And distinguishing between a true vulnerability and a poor coping skill is a little beyond the scope of what we want to talk about today. So when to assert your rights and set limits is super, super complicated. And it's really a little more complicated than the simple metric that we used above: needs versus rights versus vulnerabilities versus poor coping skills. When I set limits and I set consequences, I've got to measure those and make sure they're not punitive or vindictive. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm not trying to pay you back. When I set limits or consequences, when I assert my rights with other people's behavior, those limits and those consequences are not designed to change the other person's behavior. They are more often intended to modify my response to your behavior. So with that in mind, go back to the original theme. Do you have the right to do this or that? Can you say, do you have the right to do, the right to say, the right to go? Is it within your power to? And the answer is absolutely yes. Yes, there are things where you have the power and you have the right to do. You have the right to say. You have the right to go. You have the right to stop. But the question is not can I, but the question is should I? What will it prove? What will it solve? What will it improve? You see, when you discuss the things about being spiritual, there are 9 descriptions of a person who is spiritual. The byproducts, the fruit of the Spirit. A person who is Spirit-led will manifest these things: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But one writer takes all those 9 concepts and he basically says, hey, the fruit of the Spirit is in goodness, righteousness, and truth. So when can I, when should I, when do I? When is it okay to assert my rights? When is it okay to use my quote unquote power? When that thing that I'm going to say, when that thing that I'm going to do is good, right, and true. And I really believe that's a combination. It has to fit all 3, good, right, and true. It's a combination. It's not a la carte. The good, right, and true filter is like clearing an intersection. Is the light green? Is it my turn? Look left, look right, look left again. So I've got to come up to this intersection, and if I can't have an intersection of good, right, and true, I can't go through it. I can't do it. Is it good? Yes. Is it right? Yes. Is it true? Right. Check again. Just because something is true doesn't mean it's all right to say. Just because it makes me feel good or accomplishes some good doesn't mean it accomplishes an ultimate good. Doesn't mean it's ultimately good. And I guess I'm parsing too much here, but if it's really right, if it's something that falls into the category of this is right to do, then I believe it would also be good and true. When I make choices, my choices must be at the intersection where good, right, and true meet. You can say it. You can do it. You can go there because the rules, the law, and your rights give you permission. But making that decision, deciding to do what you can rather than do what you should. Once you do it, once you enter where your rights and the needs of others have an intersection, at that intersection, you got to make the distinction. At that intersection, you have to decide between could and should. At the intersection of power and prudence. At the intersection of right to do and do what is right. That's where you make that decision of just because you've got the right to go through it doesn't mean it would be the right, safe thing to do. Having the right of way just doesn't always mean it's the right way.